Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be making a few updates to a Keezer I built a few years ago. I'm going to be removing the CO2 cylinder that currently lives inside the Keezer and mounting it on the outside. I'm going to be installing a secondary regulator. I'm going to install a third tap. And finally, I'm going to be replacing all the tubings and fittings with Duotight fittings. Let's get started. A Keezer is a great addition to any home brewery. It's an inexpensive way to get into serving draft beers at home compared to buying a Kegerator. They're highly configurable, they meet most home brewers' needs, and they're easy to build. My Keezer's worked out great, and I'm making a few tweaks to make it even better. The main components I'll be using for this Keezer's upgrade include a bracket for mounting the CO2 cylinder on the outside of the Keezer, a secondary regulator that can independently control the pressure of 3 kegs, a third beer tap, and Duotight fittings for the gas and beer lines. I'll post links in the description for all the components I used. I started this update by removing the CO2 tank and gas lines that currently are stored in the Keezer. This is going to give me enough space for another keg and also give me a chance to organize my gas and beer lines. I then mounted the CO2 cylinder bracket on the back of the Keezer. This bracket is actually for a fire extinguisher, but it works perfectly for my new gas line configuration. It's compact, sturdy, and it's really going to make it easy for me to swap out a new CO2 tank. Next, I installed my secondary CO2 regulator that can independently control the pressure of 3 kegs. This might be overkill, but I have plans to use the primary regulator for fermentation pressure transfers and higher PSI settings for carbonating new kegs. I'm using my existing red CO2 lines for the external gas lines, but I'll be swapping out the 1/4-inch barbs that go to the kegs with the Duotight adapters. I decided to go the hybrid regulator approach with my Duotight fittings for 3 reasons. 1, I like the compact design of the traditional brass regulator. 2, the brass regulator uses less connectors for less chance of leaks. And 3, I could not get my hands on the Duotight regulator system anyways. They're very popular. I wish the gauges that came with the Luck keg displayed a lower PSI range for better accuracy, but they should work fine. My plan was to run the CO2 line through the side of the Keezer's wooden collar. The Luck keg's input barb was on the wrong side for my design, so I switched out the inlet barb to the left side to minimize the CO2 hose length. Next, I moved the DIY temperature controller forward to allow room for the gas lines to fit through the side of the Keezer. This DIY controller was super easy to build, and more information can be found on how I put this together in my How to Build a Keezer video. After I moved my DIY temperature controller forward, I mounted the new secondary regulator inside the Keezer and measured the location for the incoming gas line. I marked the outside hole location to align the gas line with the secondary regulator. After I finished installing the secondary regulator, I moved on to installing my third tap. I like the distance between my original taps, so I measured the same width and height, marked the location, and drilled a hole using a 7/8 drill bit. The new tap installs by just inserting the shank through the hole and fastening it down with a nut behind the wooden collar. The Luck keg regulator was outfitted with 1/4-inch barb fittings that needed to be swapped out with Duotight fittings. I purchased 1/4-inch Duotight adapters for the 3 CO2 lines going to the kegs. Although the fittings work, the Duotight adapter was too long for the regulator threaded couplers. I had to cut roughly 1/8 of an inch off the end of the thread in order to securely fasten it to the regulator. After I modified the Duotight fittings, I added the 3 adapters for the secondary regulator. I went back and forth on whether or not I should use Duotight fittings and tubings for the gas lines, but I'm glad I did it. Even though I don't plan on replacing these lines as often as the beer lines or even at all, they are really easy to work with and they keep the inside of the Keezer nice and tidy. I used 8mm by 5mm for the gas lines. Based on the Duotight product description, this tubing is double-walled and it offers protection against oxidation. I will also be using 3 Duotight ball and lock quick connect gas fittings. I really like the 90-degree design compared to the standard ball and lock fittings. I used the Duotight line cutter to ensure I cut clean 90-degree lines. I heard this is where most people run into trouble with leaking gas lines. And to help keep the lines organized, I purchased this tube rack organizer, which I'll mount on the side of my Keezer. Next, I mounted the secondary regulator, measured my 3 gas lines, and attached the keg adapter. For the length measurement, I gave myself plenty of slack in case I want to shorten the lines in the future. Once the gas lines were prepped from the regulator, I moved on to the beer lines. I removed my old beer lines and gathered all the parts to make the new beer lines. One thing I learned is that you need to pay attention to the diameter and length of the beer lines to ensure proper back pressure for a smooth pour. For my beer lines, I started with Duotight double wall tubing, 3 Duotight beer ball and lock fittings. They also have the same 90-degree design, 3 shank fittings, and 3 90-degree shank adapters. I'm not sure I'll need the 90-degree fittings, but I thought I would give them a try to see if they would help keep the beer lines organized. I also plan on using another beer line organizer for the beer lines. The shank adapter and the 90-degree fittings installation was straightforward. I do feel the 90-degree fittings were a little flimsy, but I'll have to give them a try before I make any final judgment calls on whether or not they are worth it. I do wish Duotight offered a stainless steel 90-degree shank fitting for more durability. Next, I moved on to cutting my beer lines. I cut 3 5-foot lines and added a beer adapter to the end of each line. I need a minimum of 5 feet for proper back pressure. This is the recommended length from Duotight for the right amount of back pressure for my setup. I bought 40 feet of this tubing, so I should have enough to swap out my keg lines 8 times. Adding the line to the shank adapter was pretty easy. I can see why these fittings are so popular compared to the old tubing and worm fittings. You just push the fittings in and that's it. We'll see how they fare over time with repeated use, but I suspect they're going to perform just fine. After I installed the beer lines, gas lines, and secondary regulator, it was time to place the 3 kegs inside the Keezer and see how things worked out. So far, it's a huge improvement to my old layout. I'm not dealing with the CO2 cylinder inside the Keezer, the gas and beer lines are easy to get to, and the 3 kegs easily fit into the Keezer with another tap. I'm happy. Like, share, subscribe. See you next time. Cheers.